Okay, so I have axed and shaped this billet using an axe and a draw knife, and you might just be able to make out there's a pencil line that I've worked to. That gives me a centre on this end, but I just then need to centre it up against the other poppet. I'm going to use an awl just to mark that centre. That goes on my head poppet, and then it's a bit of a guessing game. Offer it up, loosen it off, give it a spin. That's fine for a dibber. So then I put a mark in by tightening up the tail screw. Mark that with the awl. A little bit of cooking oil, just stops it from squeaking and helps the lathe centres bury in. Just give it a quick look. It's fairly even. Should we find those marks? A test spin. That's good for now. So starting with a roughing gouge, I'm just going to make a little noggin for the string to run in. It just keeps it away from my work. I'm also using a swinging arm treadle, so just kick the arm over to one side and the string can sit nicely in there. Just shift that along at the top, treadle it in. That should be good to go. So these are a little bit rougher than some people like to put on the lathe. I'm just going to knock the high spots off quickly. So hopefully you can make out there's still a load of rough surfaces there. I've just started nibbling in, taking the high spots. You should see that the shavings are getting a little bit longer now, and when they get to cut all the way around the work, they become nice pole shavings again. Okay, so that's roughly where I want it in terms of roughing on the lathe. I could get it cylindrical on the shave horse, but for the time input it's easier to knock the high spots off, especially for a piece that you're definitely going smaller than the original diameter that you marked up. So one of the things that I like to do, I take a powered lathe beading tool and I just knock off just a little bit off the end. That means that I've got a waste piece that the centre can burn into, and I won't get any of the centre marks, which is a black cone from the friction in the final piece of the work. It also gives me a 0 point to work off. These dibbers are 1 foot long, so I put my 12-inch mark on that shoulder and mark back from there. And then I'm using a parting tool, again borrowed from the power lathe. And that just cuts a slot that gives me the final dimensions. Spindle gouge. That'll just give me clearance for shaping that. So now I'm marking my centre where the handle stops and the dibber starts. I use the tip of a skew just to make a V cut. So depth there, you get a lot more of the bevel of the tool in contact with the wood. It causes friction and vibrates, so you don't get a very good finish. but then you can come and just take a tiny little sliver afterwards, and that tidies that up. So that's the first piece of finished turning that I'll do. The other side of that V becomes the curve for the handle. But next I'm going to swap onto the roughing gouge to give me the shape that I'm after. So that's going to be rounded, a concave in the middle, just a little bit of blending. The same on this end of the handle. Again, you can do that with the skew, but I tend to just, for roughing and speed, do that quickly with the roughing gouge. And then you need to start putting a taper on the dibber end. Now you can see I was talking earlier about longer shavings. That's going all the way around in single cut, which is good. I'm being fairly aggressive at this stage because I know the shape that I'm making, and get me down there. And again, with roughing, I don't mind going back uphill. I've got proper sharp tools. They're actually hollow ground. I've not touched them. They're straight off a tarmac, so they can cope with that in the nice soft green wood. So next I'm going to go to a 2-inch flat. Again, I'm going to work back uphill, but only for this flat section, which I didn't hit with the roughing gouge, and then I'll use that as my flat to go off down the dibber end. There we go, nice feathery thin shavings coming off there. So now that flat that I've just created gives me something to rub the bevel against. Let's reset the tool rest. Okay, that's not a bad shape. And then rather than going from full to sort of a really sharp spike, I tend to have them like this and then just taper the ends a little bit more. And then one of the last things I'll do is just put a thin point on that. Just blending the two there, one angle and then the other, just make it look good on the eye. So now just using this oval skew to finish off the roughing, leave a little groove in that V to take a burning wire. So normally I do the handle shaping with a bigger skew, but they don't seem to be cutting as nicely as this one. So they'll have to go back and get a sharpen. And then just using that fillet cut that I made with the parting tool as a stop to show me where to take the curve to. Okay, so the oval skew helps not to leave marks from the shoulder of the tool. You still do get one or two, so I'm just going to try and take those out. There we go. Getting this middle section right, it's important, otherwise you get grain breakout. And then just undercutting there a little bit more. Putting the V back in. So next we're going to do a little bit more marking out. Just a couple of lines of decoration here. Don't need marking, but the graduations on the dibber do. So I'm going to mark up an inch apart. Quite often switch between inches and centimetres to suit what I'm doing. The dibbers seem to work really nicely in inches. If you go for centimetres, you end up with a really stripy dibber end, and it just doesn't look right, so I'll stick to the inch. A lot of gardening books tend to talk in inches anyway. Plant out rows 12 inches apart, 9 inches deep, etc, etc. Okay, so now we're going to go in with the tip of a skew to make these V cuts. And to keep them even, I try and do the same number of cuts. So generally it's 2 or 3 either side. So that's 2, 1, 2. I like to keep those fairly shallow. If you've got a deep groove, it works well with the burning wire, but then you have a flat, a shoulder, and then the sort of U-shaped black groove. And just coming back to doing the V grooves for the decoration. Now they're on a convex, so just have to be a little bit careful and present the tool to actually cut a groove. That second cut was almost vertical. So that's the turning done. I'll take the tool rest away to give me access for the burning wire. So this is mild steel welding wire on a couple of toggles. Got to be fairly delicate with it, because if it catches and kinks it will break, but you can keep them going for months at a time if you're careful, especially if you're not changing the diameters too drastically on what you're using them for, so going from really big to small and then back up to big. I like to keep the toggles together, so I'm holding the toggles together like that. Some people like to keep them apart, it's entirely up to you, whatever works best. And then I'm also hitting the front of my fingers onto the lathe bed just to put a little bit of tension on. Whichever way works best for you, stick with it, because the consistency in terms of whether you have your burning wire thusly or whether it's constantly being held apart will affect the steel and the longevity. You can buy spools of welding wire and make your own. I'll be offering some of these up on my website once I've taken some photos of them. Okay, one other thing with the burning wire is it gets very hot. You do not want to touch this, probably a couple 100 degrees, but that means that it's hot when you put it in the groove. The first ones that you do, you'll need to pedal more, and then as you get towards the end you'll need to pedal less. One thing I like to do is get a nice black line without too much of this yellowing. You might not be able to pick that up on the video, but if you burn too much, it just dries the timber out and gives you this yellow colour, which I try to avoid. Okay, so next thing is burnishing. I've got some shavings on the floor, but they're all mixed in with mud and leaves and stuff, so I'm just going to take a small handful off the little bits and bobs on the lathe. There's usually more in there, but that's all you need, not too many. And then just going to offer those on and pedal quickly. Try not to get too much of your hand in contact with the wood, because it can give you a friction burn. Just go over that, and what you're doing is creating heat between the shavings and the workpiece, picking up any loose fibres, and it just gives you a nice smooth finish. When I'm demoing in public, people are sort of looking at me funny, so what I do is I burnish the dibber end, leave the handle, and then pass it around the crowd. It really does make a huge difference to your work. So finishing, just going to take my skew chisel, just going to round off as much of this end as possible. So whilst I was turning, I needed this end thick to give stability. If it goes too thin, the work will whip around, you've got all the rest of the turning to do. But now we've done all the turning, I can thin this down considerably and just try and get the tooled finish on as much of the top of the curve as possible without breaking and letting the whole thing ping off the lathe, which is less than amusing. So they're just curving over that point, and I'll stop there, otherwise it will break. Take the tool rest away, undo the screw, and there you have one dibber with noggins on. And all I'll do is I'll take a nice sharp saw, cut those off and finish them with a knife, and that is your dibber. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope if you did, you'll subscribe to the channel. I'll be doing more pole lathe work. It's something that I'm well practiced in, and I'd like to share more tips and tricks with you. So yeah, thanks a lot. Have a great afternoon.